Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another LP Alliance live stream. This is our third of many. We are LP Alliance, an inter-caucus coalition dedicated to unifying, rebuilding, and revolutionizing the Libertarian Party. I threw that one in there. I hope that's all right. I think we could do three. That's good. My name is Amanda Griffiths, and I am joined by Phil Ryan, Nathan Madden, Kyle Davis, Rose Leatherman, and we might be joined by a few others as well, because this is what happens when we do live streams. We'll be taking your questions and comments from the chat as well, so please feel free to drop them in. And of course, tonight we will be recapping the LNC chair and vice chair re-elections, as well as the appointment of an investigatory committee regarding the allegations against Angela McArdle. All of us have a few remarks to kick this off, our personal analyses of what happened last night and how to go forward. So I suppose as introductory co-host privilege, I will begin. Last night, the LP thwarted Michael Heise's installation as chair. And this involved members on the LNC who were very courageous, resisted threats, intimidation, and coercion. We resisted an offensive, but we didn't win new ground. This is our beginning. We prevented Heise from seizing the LNC unilaterally, but several who seek a Hoppian centralized future for the Libertarian Party still hold the reins. The composition of the LNC remains virtually unchanged, and once again, this composition includes the people who did stand in Heise's way, but it also includes the people who threatened and coerced and intimidated in order to try to have Heise get his way. So representatives loyal to the old leadership have stepped in to fill power vacuums, and Heise's people are out in full force to mobilize their own and take their revenge at this year's conventions as well as Grand Rapids. If we accept last night's results as good enough, we will let them. Last night was a taste of what we can accomplish when we have a real choice as to our leadership, a fresh slate of candidates, and the institutional mechanisms to revolutionize the Libertarian Party and the influence it has on politics and society. The momentum for progress is present, but only if we refuse to stop pushing. Last night bought us time to push. And that will be our job over the next several months, to push, to not be seduced into believing that a reinstatement of the status quo is progress simply because it is not a radical deterioration, not to confuse a single episode of resistance for an enduring victory. We can win that by exchanging ideas, sharing resources, and strategizing together. We never came together fundamentally against any chair or any caucus. We came together for a Libertarian Party that puts liberty first. We're fighting for a Libertarian Party that celebrates the power of the individual and championing the cause of liberty inside and outside our ranks. If we become complacent after last night's changes, we will suffer a Reno redux, this time with Heise much more clearly at the helm. So as we witness the death of a paradigm, as the era of mono-caucus rule dies and old factions disintegrate, we, all of us, are the force that will rebuild the Libertarian Party. Last night was a spark. Now we get to stoke the flames and keep that fire burning through 2026. Phil, thank you for being here. What say you, sir?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really disagree with anything you said. As someone who joined this coalition, to have this idea that, you know, different people could coalition together to have political change and things that we agree with, I think it was the first great sign that this is even possible. The fact that this resistance happened and that people kind of joined together to do it means that this vision of repairing kind of party wounds, like it went out last night, right? The party, the LNC members themselves, and like the general membership are rejecting monocaucus rule. We don't want, you know, anyone in there who's going to keep propagating these faction wars any longer. We're all tired of it, right? Like, we all recognize now that we have a lot more in common than we have in difference, right? And we also showed that we don't want to be GOP light. The new chair made a statement about this, and he was right that this will bring in funding and bring in people that have trust again. And so those were really positive signs to me. And lastly, that we denied that, we said that we did not want a chair that's bought and paid for by some unknown outside party. And it took courage to say that to these, to him, from these people that used to be probably very close to him. And so I'll end it on saying that, like, I have hope and money to give to the LNC now, because I see that there is this possible future where a coalition style LNC can happen. And in that, we can get back to messaging that really kind of gets at the heart of these kind of atrocities that the state is committing, and be willing to stand up to Trump, because the new LNC chair has not been in bed, essentially, with that administration. And so this was a great sign, and I'm happy for it. But you're right. We need to push and build on these coalitions. We need to keep people excited about the chance for an LNC that's functional and not divided, and to push away people that want to add salt to that wound. Right? The only people that benefit from a divided party is the people in power at the state. And I think we, as a membership, have to say enough is enough. Right. And so I've reached out to many Mises Caucus members that I view now as being principled. I think they've been made aware of things that they may not have been aware of before, when it comes to the certain tactics. Now that they're seeing it happen to their friends, with the type of threats, the blackmail, the coercion, the doxing, the calling people's jobs. These are things that I knew about happening in the past and have seen the evidence of. And some things that I can't say because I have sources that I don't want to lose. But I think now it's become very clear that this is a widespread and long-term problem that many members and many membership states, certain state caucuses of the Mises Party, they didn't know. And I think now they do. And so I think that this is a chance for major revolution in that caucus, but also how they interface and become inclusive to wanting to collaborate with other factions within the party. And I'll pass it on, I guess, to Kyle here. You're muted, Kyle.
Thanks, Phil. So I think, to me, the biggest thing is I don't love the way last night was done. I don't think that having to rush through a vote is fair or right for the people. I believe that should be open and there should be discussion and everything else. I believe that the people who did so with the LNC and on the board were in a position where they were forced to, as just a few people across the country ignored the will of the people, ignored the will of the delegates, and instead forced through their ideas of who should be what. I believe that based on a great deal of evidence, including the fact that the vote went the way it did, it was known that Michael Heiss did not have the votes from the LNC. Michael Heiss actively attempted to overthrow the will of the people. We even have people who have admitted to it. We have Austin Martin, the chair of Hawaii. We have Andrew Chatterton from Michigan. We know that these people actively worked to overthrow the will of the people. Altogether, that region, looking at the current count, we have about 1,500 people, and 15 chairs were all that was polled, with 8 of them working to attempt to remove both Region 1 reps. That's absurd. It is absurd that 8 people, spawned mostly by 2 people, were forced into a decision because Michael Heiss has delusions of grandeur. We have a party that actively attacked people not in their own region. Those same 2 people, Chatterton and McGee, were part of a group that attempted to remove my region rep in Region 2, Jonathan McGee. That is unacceptable. Region 1 has its representation across 2 reps as a super region. We are our own separate entity. This is an absolutely absurd motion that's happened. We have a person in Michael Heiss that has attempted to twist previous victories of the party as nothing more than losses. 2 days before Ross Ulbricht was freed, We saw Leonard Peltier be freed. We saw 37 of the 40 people on death row at the federal level have their sentences commuted to life, so that a libertarian principle of never having the government murder its citizens was accomplished. That was done with Joe Biden, and it was heavily affected by members of the Libertarian Party that worked not from the top down, but from the grounds up, something that the Project Decentralized Revolution is supposed to be all about. It's something that we've all come together on. We all believe in grassroots organization, so why is there an attempt at a coup from the top down? After this attempted coup, with 15 minutes before the meeting last night involving the Mises higher-ups, Heiss, Nem, etc., attempting to remove a sitting representative, ignoring the 3-day rule of the bylaws, instead attempting to have an emergency removal in under 15 minutes so that the other side couldn't win. We are an alliance about getting everyone together. There is no other side. The Libertarian Alliance is what Libertarian Party is. We're completely and utterly big tent. We're as open as we can be, from the left to the right, everyone in between. The idea that a group of 3 people across the entire country can overrule the more than 10,000 libertarian sustaining members and lifetime members is an absurdity. They have no place ever being in a position of leadership or power in this party again. And that's what I've got.
Nathan, do you have any thoughts on last night?
Good evening, everyone. So I actually get to be the audience surrogate here because I did not watch last night's proceedings. I've only heard the outcomes of the chair and vice chair races, and apparently both of my region's representatives were removed. I don't know how, and I was not informed, even though I am the second vice chair of my own state party. So I would definitely like to deep dive into that. But for now, I'll just say this. I think that the outcomes of the chair and vice chair vacancies was satisfactory. Mr. Nikela, who has been a longtime party advocate and worker, has also had a long time in organizational experience after running his own business and, of course, through the party. So I have no qualms about him being chair. In fact, I think that's probably one of the better outcomes that we could have received. And then, of course, Mr. Dar, who I consider a personal friend as well as ally within the party. He is a non-controversial figure, even though his votes don't align with previous party leadership. He's very quiet and not bombastic about things, which generally keeps things calm around him, which I think is very, very good. And I think together they will exemplify a mixture of honesty, experience, integrity, and utility. And I also like Steven's taste in cigars. Thank you.
What is his taste in cigars? Sorry, Rose.
Cohibas.
Oh, yeah, of course. Red dots all the way. Rose.
Yeah, I don't know anything about that, but my significant other loves cigars, so I'm sure he'd be interested. Anyway, so as someone who started out on the side of the Mises Caucus and then eventually switched alignments, it's been very interesting watching the slow deterioration of what was once a very promising looking and energetic movement. Like when I first joined, I was one of many people who they had been kind of disappointed with the Libertarian Party for a long time with the Bill Weld type candidates. So they saw this faction that said that they were going to make the Libertarian Party more radically libertarian. And like I got involved with my state chapter back in 2020. Like first, like when the meetings first started, like there were the first like 15 minutes of each meeting, you'd have new member introductions. Like they were growing the party very quickly. Then, so there was all this lead up to the Reno reset. We were all so excited seeing what happened in Reno, and we thought we're like, okay, the party is gonna like there's like this new life to the party. It's gonna do all these awesome things. Then, like not very long after the reset occurred, you started seeing cracks forming. Like you started seeing all these big money donors leave and membership dropping. Now, originally, like I was very charitable about this originally because, you know, we expected that certain big money donors were going to leave. That, for example, Koch funded donors who had long been a problem in the party that we kind of wanted out anyway. So long story short, yeah, for a long time, we've been seeing the people getting increasingly disillusioned. We've been seeing the different factions forming as they get fed up with certain leadership. And yeah, that, and ever since the DC convention, it's just been, the process has just been happening faster and faster. Like they've been losing people, and then the more they lose people, the more they would seem to double down on what was not working. And it's just been it's just spiraled faster and faster. So that brought us to last night. Like I was one of the people originally who thought that, okay, we need to take our time here. We need to not rush a candidate through. We need to have a temporary interim chair, and we need to have a full investigation conducted before we appoint anyone new. We need to know the scope of the alleged corruption. We need to know who was involved. But it increasingly was looking like the LNC was having their hand forced because people were trying to force Michael Heist through from the look of it. In my opinion, they've always, or rather, in my experience, they've always been very slow to read the room. But I think they did, after the first day or two, catch on to the fact that they did not have the support required to rush him through. Because originally it was the LNC members and the non-Heist faction that wanted to take their time and look at all options. They didn't want to rush anyone through. It was the Heist faction that wanted to quickly get him in as they wanted to get him in as fast as they could. But then once they realized that they weren't going to have the votes for it, and they didn't have the support, then the sides flipped. Suddenly they want to cool things off and take their time. And now, yeah, like what other people were saying, I think that the LNC felt like their hand was being forced. They needed to get someone in place because otherwise, the Heist faction was trying to buy time so that they could do whatever sorts of offers or blackmail or whatever that they needed to in order to get the support that they needed to get him through. Because, yeah, so it was very interesting watching last night's meeting, because if this had happened 2 or 3 years ago and I'd watched something like that, I would have concluded, oh, wow, the Mises Caucus really are a minority faction that's trying to take on this obviously corrupt bureaucratic party. They have this vision for the party, but they're being stopped by all these dumb rules and all these entrenched leaders. It was interesting being able to see it, like knowing what I know now, it was interesting seeing it kind of in a new light. Now that they've had their chance and they've failed on basically every front to grow the party or to get more libertarians in local offices and everything they ran on, yeah, it's becoming increasingly clear that people are fed up with them and wanted them out. Because I actually did find some of the tactics done last night questionable, but they needed to keep Heist out, I think.
What were some of those tactics that you found to be questionable?
Well, what was it? For example, not allowing public comment. I had mixed feelings on that, because normally I would be in favor of allowing public comment, but I can also understand why they wouldn't have wanted public comment, because, okay, as was mentioned during the meeting, people had already sent probably hundreds of emails. So they already had a general idea of what the membership wanted. But in addition, like the meeting already it went on till nearly midnight. Had they allowed public comment, it would have gone on for hours. And I suspect people would have used it as an opportunity to filibuster the whole meeting. So it was a questionable call, but I can understand why they did it.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting too, the back and forth, because you're right, it did flip. And I was also one who thought ideally it would be great to have a debate, an actual debate, and then put it to the delegates. And not everyone was on board with this. People were saying that it would be too messy. Maybe they were right. But to have the delegates actually consulted and to see what their will was seemed to be more democratic. That would have been preferable. Then we started getting reports that Heis's people were using that time or trying to use that time to strong arm various members who might have been on the fence. So all of a sudden it flipped where, when Heis's faction were losing in terms of in terms of wanting to move it, we wanted to move it out. Then they wanted it as soon as possible. When they were losing this particular election last night, then they wanted to move it out. So there's been a little bit of whiplash back and forth. It's not really a sign of integrity.
Right. No, I started out on the side of, because originally people were pitching McGee as the vice chair, and there was from, I think, people who were generally on our side were like, we don't want to rush anyone through. And then, the Heis faction started quickly trying to rush Heis through, and then they started pressuring the McGee supporters to withdraw their support or just change their votes, and then ultimately pressured him to step down, from what I understand. And I'm like, okay, this is not good. Maybe, I guess they need to appoint someone, or I can at least understand why they feel they need to appoint someone before someone that I don't think actually has popular support is forced through.
And there was also the rumor that Amash was going to be throwing his hat in, was willing to consider that. And kind of at the 11th hour, we found out that wasn't so much happening. Kyle, are you familiar with what went into that specifically?
I do not have exact details. I have an understanding based on bits and pieces from a number of conversations. My understanding is that Justin Amash wanted to be a unifying ticket. As such, the fact that there was going to be this rigmarole where he wasn't going to be elected and Heis wasn't realistically going to be elected, and it was going to go to a whole series of other things, was going to be a problem for him. He wanted to be able to come in and actually get libertarianism goals met, right? He wanted to push the libertarian movement. So realistically, and this is an opinion part, but Michael Heis is the reason we don't have Justin Amash right now. Instead, despite Justin Amash being very popular for the party, we have a compromise chair, which, this is not an attack on Steve and Nikayla. It's a fact of the case that we ended up with someone that may not have been anyone's first choice. That has its ups and downs. It's something that's a very mixed bag on things. There's the possibility, with the alternate voting strategies the Libertarian Party believes in, that Nikayla would have beaten out Heis and Amash in an actual race. But we don't know that. And because of an attempt to destroy an actual race, we ended up with someone pushed through at the last second and people coming together to try to make a unity ticket in Stephen Nikayla and Paul Darr that I very much hope works. I very much hope that they can start to heal the wounds. But they're working at a disadvantage because there's now 6 people on our board who were willing to overthrow the will of the people and literally attempt to backstab all of the other members on the board and try to have them removed for disagreeing with them. It's unfathomable levels of corruption.
I will say I wouldn't have had much hope in the past that this wouldn't eventually just lead to a down the line removal of all these reps. But I think seeing the blatant kind of actions that happened during that meeting, I think there will be a lot of Mises Caucus chapters around the country and people that will continue quiet quitting. There have been a lot of people that are behind the scenes have said, I am done with the sort of stuff that I've been seeing lately. And they are quiet quitting. And, they are people that you wouldn't expect that's saying, I'm done with this. And I would imagine that any chairs that try to remove region reps that are well liked among their regions via strong arm will get increased scrutiny. And I think that the best thing we could do now is say, hey, if you are being strong armed, if you are being blackmailed, if you are, being harassed or doxxed or whatever, that we have your back, right? Like, I don't care what side of the faction wars you're on. If you are having these sort of coercive tactics used against you, I view that as a violation of the NAP. And I think that action of trying to do that is also trying to violate contracts between members and their representatives. And so I think that as people that are trying to, unite and have somewhat of a healing process happen within the party, the best thing we can do is say, hey, we don't agree on a lot of shit, but I have your back. And like, if it comes to convention, you feel threatened or you feel like you're going to be intimidated, that there will be people there that will stand by you. I think that when this happened in the past, not enough people knew about the extent of it. And it allowed people to basically go to conventions and not have the support that they deserved. And then they ultimately made the decision that I'm not willing to keep up with this. If no one's going to stand by me, why am I going to keep this fight up? And I think the best thing we can do now is to say and extend a hand and extend somebody to stand behind you or in front of you and say, no, this is not the way the party should be run. It decries all of the things that libertarians believe in, regardless of spectrum. And I think it's a blatant, obvious affront to those things, right? So I think we do have an opportunity here to really extend a hand to people that are feeling uncomfortable with the current state of affairs, and really just try to invite them back in and say, like, look, you may have not been aware of the other abuses, but now you're the victim of them, right? That could be a moment of reconciliation for people that may have felt like, why aren't these people standing up for me? Because they just believed the propaganda that, oh, those are lies, those are this or that. And now it's just patently available for everybody to see the level of kind of aggression that might be utilized to strong arm a party into an outcome that they want. And a lot of these same tactics have gone back for over 4 years. When it first started. And so, like I said, I think now would be the time to be extending hands out and support. And that if there are any more people that are quiet quitting, you can continue to reach out to me privately. I will not share your information. But you can speak to me. And if you really feel uncomfortable, you can get involved quietly behind the scenes.
We do have people in LPA who are anonymous to many of our members. So we do try to arrange that. So Rose was saying, though, that, if you'd watched this a couple years ago, you would have thought the people who voted highest down were the bad guys and were the nasty, corrupt, bureaucratic people. So there's a little bit of a concern, right? Because there is a narrative going around now that there was this coup, right? There was this coup orchestrated. And so there's a possibility that there are Mises people and others who are watching this and thinking what Rose is saying that she would have thought, 2 or so years ago. So yeah, that coup narrative, I don't know how much traction does it seem to be getting?
Well, to be honest, I'm not sure. Like, I think I don't think it's gonna catch on the way it would have 2 or 3 years ago, just because enough people by this point have either been involved with the Mises Caucus and left, or been kicked out for being for disagreeing with something that they were doing, or they've seen like the tactics firsthand. But for example, my biggest concern is this is going to look like the whole thing that happened with the LPNH back in 2021. Like, in hindsight, like I fully understand why like the existing party leadership tried to do what they did, but that whole thing kind of, because of the narrative that was formed, it kind of cemented the idea in everyone's minds that the Mises Caucus was this faction that were, they were just trying to breathe new life into the party. They had all this pushback and corruption from bureaucratic leadership who didn't want to lose their prestigious titles and their elite social club and blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you all know the talking points by now. So for people who may be new to the party, and I know the Mises Caucus is really desperately trying to reach out to people who they can bring in who are still new and don't know what's going on. Because, I mean, they've always kind of relied on people who are fairly new to the party, don't know the history, don't know the people who they're told to hate and want to remove. So basically, yeah, if they're able to reach enough new people and like plant the idea, oh, there was this coup by the corrupt leadership to keep us out. Yeah. So that's my biggest concern, that this is going to re-energize the heist faction of the Mises Caucus.
The biggest thing that I question to that, though, is that all of these people that voted against him down there were people that were on the inside circle. Right?
Uh-huh.
These are people that were installed in those positions, handpicked by Heiss. Right? That these are people that he knew, and maybe he just didn't know that they would stand on principles against his marching orders after enough evidence had come out that bad actions were happening. Right? And then he further tried to squeeze. Right? And as we know with any central authority, the tighter you squeeze, the more sand falls through your hand. Right? And in reality, we don't want that sand that is falling out of that hand to just leave the party. If there are people that are falling through, it means that they've said enough is enough, and they likely are principled libertarians. And it's just that they might have a different view of what that word means. But if that sand can work with other sand, right? Like why not get it going? I see Amanda doesn't like my sand analogy.
No, I'm just castles in the sand. That's all.
Hey.
I mean, we saw that play out with the Judicial Committee. Most of those members were ones handpicked by the Mises Caucus, but ultimately, I mean, if you look at the ruling with the Karen and Harless removal, they ultimately ruled like they followed the bylaws and they stood on principle. They didn't just blindly do what the chair wanted. And she was very unhappy about that and tried to immediately schedule a new meeting to once again try to remove the secretary that she had issues with, but that ended up not happening for reasons I'm sure you're all aware of.
That's one of the things that I wanted to touch on too. There's each candidate got at least 40 minutes to talk last night to try to convince everyone that they were the right candidate. So the concept of a coup is already hilarious because there was literally 40 and 45 minutes for the people to talk, and Heiss got longer. And during his 45 minutes, Heiss consistently blamed the LNC for the problems of the party. And Heiss chose all but 3 of them. There's 17 people and you have 14 of them under your thumb. And it sucks. That's your fault. When you are the boss of these 14 people running the party, and the party is having problems, it's your fault. The shit runs downhill as far as like grief from the inside. Shit runs uphill as far as blame goes. The person at the top is the person whose fault it is. The people on that LNC surprised the hell out of me.
Uh-huh.
I had heard nothing but bad things about several people. I'm going to point out Adrian just because Adrian's an easy target that I think everyone kind of has heard about. Adrian stood against a lot of flack and maintained his decorum. He maintained the decorum of the board for the most part, despite Pat Ford's best efforts. And in the end, actually really led a strong meeting. Like, you can argue parts that we want to be better, right? We want there to be open discussion. We want there to be different bylaws in the way motions are held, where you've got the open nomination versus a closed nomination. We can argue about those things, but those are bylaws problems. Those are problems in the way we use Roner. And he held it fine. There's not going to be a judicial appeal on this one. Everything was by the book. That's
Well,
not
he's a
something you can
philosopher,
say.
so
That's
he's
true.
a philosopher
So
in a gym.
one thing really quickly, I want to push back on something Rose had said about Reno and the JC. So it's commonly misconstrued that it was a full Mises slate
Oh,
in
not
Reno.
full, yes, definitely not. But many of them were there.
Well, even beyond that, um, is my understanding that Mises, part of the Mises tactic during that time was to just apply their name to pretty much everyone who won, so that they associated themselves, whether or not the actual candidate agreed with it or not. It was one of those. It's not necessarily Mises endorsing them. It's they're saying they're good enough, right? And this was a time period when, again, you were dealing with a lot of people who didn't have the history of the party. You had mostly just like floor whips were driving votes, and that was essentially how Reno played out. So they had to just associate with somebody who was on the ballot, and okay, this is our pick, so everybody go vote for this guy. And then obviously they got the popularity of, oh, we had a full Mises slate, when in all actuality that's not the case. Many of these people did not subscribe to the machinations that ended up playing out, and some of them were the first defectors. So, and I think we've seen that with Todd Hagopian. We've seen that with many of the Judicial Committee members. I mean, Mike Seebeck has a longer history in the party than the majority of anybody else, and we're seeing that. So I think that it's very, very hard to keep libertarians in lockstep with each other, because that's just not how we operate, first of all. And I think trying to force a square into a circle really doesn't work out.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting, because like what you said about them just kind of putting their name on the people who won or the people who were good enough, because they've always been very good at creating the illusion that they've got this widespread support. So if they could just put their name on candidates who won, it would look like, oh, hey, this person is obviously part of the Mises Caucus, and look at all these wins they got. Like, they must know what they're doing. They must have all this support. They've always been very good at that. And that it kind of, like, in the darker side of that is they've always been very good, from what I've observed personally, at making it like the people who they excommunicate, the people who they turn against, they've been very good at making those people feel isolated, making it look as if the person has no support, like they're just some random loser who must have some petty reason for leaving the Mises Caucus, and that's why they're suddenly against them. Now they've become a hater because, oh, they must have just listened to the haters too much, and or they had some petty issue. Like, they're very good with planting these narratives in everyone's minds. So yeah.
Well, it doesn't
become. Oh, go ahead.
The alienation factor, it's not helped by people. I'll just make up a hypothetical name like Archie Flowers. It's not helped by people who just ramrod people for the slightest differences in opinion on the other side, and I think that's one of the huge benefits of this alliance. Is I think the vast majority of people within this are sensible, reasonable, rational people. And I mean, we're all libertarians looking for liberty in our lifetime. That's the mission statement of the entire party, and I think that this alliance really encompasses that.
Mm-hmm.
We did see going back to last night, several tactics at play to try and basically invalidate the meeting. There was an attempt to, and others might know more about this than I did, because I was tuning in and out. I was trying to monitor our chat that we had going. But there was an attempt to have the meeting rendered illegitimate as a result of someone being improperly seated, which is just indicative of these kind of feeble bylaw manipulation attempts that there is no grounds to removing some or invalidating a meeting because someone was seated improperly, correct?
But you can do it if it's improperly noticed.
Right.
These types of tactics are not new. Like, how many state conventions has this happened at where like they're accidentally improperly noticed, and then if things don't go the way of the leadership, oops, sorry, we improperly noticed that, so the results are invalid. We're gonna have to reschedule for a couple of months down the line. Oh, it sucks that other people who came to this one probably don't have the money or time off of work to be able to travel to another convention, so they won't be able to vote this time. Like these are not new tactics, and I don't think that they're accidental. There is very good reason to believe that they're not accidental.
Oh, I'm sure they're not accidental. They're probably getting fed from a parliamentarian that his whole purpose of it being involved in the Mises Caucus is to find loopholes that allow them to have their outcome they want. And then those same loopholes, if tried to be used against them, immediately say, oh, no, that's not. So this person writes as a parliamentarian from both sides, which points to like an ethical issue here, right? That he can just flip flop for whatever makes it better for his situation. And so we actually have some video clips from our stream here of this action happening, which was very uncomfortable.
You will give a name, and then we will go ahead and that will be your recorded vote. Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to take a 20-minute break so that I can poll my chairs.
Objection.
Okay. Stop. Everyone stop. Everyone stop. Okay. There is a motion on the floor to recess for 20 minutes. We just got back into session. Is there a second for that motion? The motion dies for lack of second. Mr. Lamb?
Yes, I would just like to motion that technically, I evidently have not been appropriately in this meeting, as Secretary Carlos has indicated that she let it slide to allow me into this meeting. So I think most of this meeting has been out of order.
Your objection, or I don't know what that was. I don't know if it was inquiry or point of order. Okay, so I guess your vote won't count. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it certainly.
You've been on the prevailing side, Mr. Lamb. So if you're saying that your presence here as a voting member is something that is out of order by your own admission, then your vote is irrelevant. Not that you've been on the prevailing side for anything anyway.
The only time it would make a difference is if your vote made a difference. So your mere presence of an illegitimate potential vote does not invalidate a whole meeting. But nice try.
That is.
But nice
so
try.
Yeah, this moment here is kind of indicative of the overall strategy. They want to do anything they can to give them further chance to strong arm enough people off of the region reps so that way they could retain power. And it's like it's a very blatant attempt to do it for anybody who has eyes to see. And it was good to see the pushback that happened there. And I know we all have our qualms about Adrian, about how he's interacted with certain people. I thought he handled himself very well there. He put his foot down, and then Carrie Ann Harlos, who happens to be a very strong-willed parliamentarian, set the record straight at the time of the recording, which I think is really important when it comes to a JC appeal, that if there's people that ask these questions, it's like, no, that doesn't invalidate anything. And it was awesome to see, regardless of what we think about the people that were voted on, it was great to see that it was stood up to, that it was very blatant, that the whole goal of this was to extend time. And there's numerous other cases in the video, which you can find on our YouTube for the whole length of the video, of these moments where they're doing everything they could to grasp at straws to retain some sort of time to get control, right?
Because they wanted to wear out the time so everyone would be tired and would agree to adjourn and return to it. But I was going to say though, okay, one, I was in the actual meeting, so I didn't get to see these comments, so those were nice to see. But yeah, if anyone knows anything about the region rep in question, he had his mind made up from the beginning. He despite assuring the state chairs that he was going to vote how they wished, yeah, no, his mind was made up long ago. I suspect he has reasons for not wanting a non-Angela, someone who's not handpicked by Angela in power when there is some kind of audit.
So you mentioned that there was this attempt to, go and adjourn because everyone was so tired. The first thing that we saw in this meeting that I think really gave us a sense of how it was going to go was the vote on whether to postpone. And it was a much closer vote than it seemed that everyone believed that it would be. Where it was basically it was by one vote. The motion was struck down, was ruled against. So that was, I think, the turning point where people started to think, okay, well, maybe this is going to shape up to be more interesting than I thought it would. We had a few indications about sort of how the tide might turn, but was this a shock to others? Were people really expecting Heise to do well, or was this really just a Hail Mary?
I went in expecting the worst. I'm like, I think we got the best outcome we possibly could have. And I like how people are ignoring the fact that the new chair was is or was still a Mises guy, but they're all flipping out and claiming that the haters took over, of course. But
that's another thing.
I went in expecting, I had no idea how the whole thing was going to play out, honestly. It looked like it could go either way.
Yeah, and Adrian was the tie-breaking vote as well. Yes.
I'd just like to voice my agreement with Rose that this was the optimal outcome.
Of the ones that we had available, it was certainly not as bad as a Heise outcome would be. I think the concern too is that Heise is capable because he's connected, as we learned last night as well, and perhaps we can get that clip queued up too. As we learned last night, Heise is connected enough potentially to bring others into the party who may not be hardline libertarians, who might be more on the right, in order to rebuild a broken caucus and restore the numbers that had been purged from Mises. Rose is absolutely correct that our chair is a Mises chair. His voting record is pretty hardline Mises, pretty down the road. And at the same time, they're still alleging that he is a traitor, that he was part of a coup to overthrow Heise. So it's just interesting how this is shifting. With the split on the board, I suppose, with the split on national, does it look like anything is really going to get done over the past several months? Because I feel like there will be some butting heads for sure.
I am hopeful that, obviously this took coalition to get a position where Paul Dar was vice chair and where Stephen is the chair, right? So I think there is hope that it could be there. And a lot of what Stephen said during his kind of discussion there spoke to unity and healing of the party. Whether that'll happen, will depend on how he chooses to run as a chair. If he seems to run on an idea that he's going to represent more than just his version of libertarian, maybe he's a right-leaning Ron Paul style libertarian. If he's willing to represent, classical liberal libertarians, radical caucus libertarians, and does it from a place of like, how do I represent all of these people, even if they're not me? Then I could have some hope. And it was kind of a stark contrast to what we saw when Heise was talking about his vision for the party. So I think we could bring up a clip of where he really kind of pitches his idea of what the party should be, and kind of the idea that even unity is even possible. And I think we can have that up here in a second.
Devin has this queued up too. We have several clips from Heise's. Here we go.
All right.
I mean, I think it's on display pretty good tonight. Shutting down debate, shutting down comments from the public, talking about how, oh, well, we already know what the vibe is, and then not mentioning what was in all the hundreds of emails and all that kind of stuff. There just seems to be like I don't know, a reticence to actually hear from the members or like give any credibility to the members. And I also think there's just a lack of, and I want to credit Steve for this point, a lack of direction. Like if you don't have goals, then it's hard to define a direction. It's hard to create a map from here to there. And so it is great that those goals were set, but I'm not exactly seeing any action from the board to carry out those goals, which again is why working with staff has been absolutely eye-opening, because, on the board, it's just like nightmare after nightmare, negativity after negativity. And then you get into the staff meetings and it's good news after good news after good news after good news. And everybody talks about the board stuff, but nobody ever talks about the staff stuff. So I find that to be very unfortunate. So how I would intend to unify the party is how I had already done it before, frankly, is I don't think you can unify for the sake of unification. I think what you have to do is the best that you can do is cast a vision, be at the front of the lines executing on that vision, do your best to find a place for everybody to be in that vision, and let the fruits of acting that vision out speak for themselves and motivate people to come in behind you. And then to the extent that people don't want to be involved or don't want to get on board with that mission, then encourage them to form their own vision and compete. And we have a friendly competition of those visions that is based on productivity and expanding the interest of the party. And I think I have done that with what I have with the strategies that I've built, not just Project Decentralized Revolution, but the issue coalition strategies and the teams that I've already stood up, the various teams that I've already stood up, and I'm in the process of standing up that cover issues and give people multiple methods of expanding liberty in real life, whether it's electorally or legislatively.
Yeah, so you can hear in that moment that he does not want unity, right? That he really is looking at this as it's my way, get on board or get the fuck out, right? And this is what has led to donors leaving, longtime donors leaving, members being unwilling to give their money. And this process is, this healing that we really need for the party for it to actually grow. We can't keep stoking the fires of this division, right? And so much so that, he doesn't want to see a kind of a unified vision for the party, that when asked about, fundraising and going forward, that he wholesale rejects calling people who have left, right? Where we have these records of people that were highly dedicated to the party, that have put their life, sweat, blood, and money into the party. And he doesn't want to call them for a certain reason. I don't know if we have that on
we do have him discussing his donors, and so this seemed to be a selling point or I seem to believe that this would be a selling point, this notion that there were people who would pay to have him serve as chair
full time, because they saw first time I did that, I was very, very effective at fundraising, at bringing people into the party, at carrying out and executing on my plans. So, they want to see that again. And, so if I get the chair, I would be carrying through with that.
I'm confused about what you mean by that. Are you saying that they would donate to you to pay you to be chair?
Yeah, there are supporters that want to finance me to be chair because they want to see this vision.
And why have they not donated to the party?
They are donors to the party, but I can't speak to all of their financial decisions either, but they are donors to the party.
Would they be upping their donation to the party in addition to donating to you as chair?
I have no idea.
Okay. Do you find that conflicts at all with your duty to what your duty to the LNC would be, to take money from donors to finance your position as chair rather than allow that money to go to the LNC itself?
I don't think I'd be allowing anything. I think people fund what they want to fund. So if they're already donors to the party, they're members, they're supporters, they want to see a chair be full time to carry out a vision and support that vision. So I think that's great. I mean, I think the fact that we have a membership that is so passionate about something like this, that they would do that for me, just the way they send in hundreds of emails in support, I think that's great. And so I think as long as you are maintaining the fiduciary responsibility that was talked before, and you are at the front of the line carrying out that mission, that's a great thing. We should want our chair to be full time.
Sure. Would you be disclosing the names of all these donors on your conflict form?
I would disclose the names of all of the donors as soon as the board disclosed the names of everyone that signs their checks.
Okay, that's a problem for me. Thank you.
We also have a comment now coming in that says, historically, the highest LP join rate has come from expired members, which raises the question, as we're going forward now, there's been some kind of shift, again, more of a stopping the bleeding than actually healing the wound, but there has been some change. How do we bring expired members back into the party? What is that pitch when there is still more work to be done, right? This is not the end of the road. What's the pitch to get people to come back in when there's more that needs to change?
The biggest pitch.
Go ahead.
The biggest pitch is getting people ready for Grand Rapids. This is something that on the lead up to DC, we did not see enough of. There's an open window where we need people to rejoin the Libertarian Party, right? Before the closure window of being a delegate to DC, before the delegate allocations are closed to the states. So that's the time period that we need to focus on, where we need new party members or old party members rejoining, because this is going to be the fight. You're going to have libertarians for a day that are brought on by Heiss and his backers, and if we don't respond in kind, I mean, obviously we want libertarians for a lot longer than a day, but that's all he needs. For us, if we want long-term party building to be achieved, we are going to need just as many, if not more. So
yeah, let's talk a little bit about that long-term party building, because I think one thing that Michael Heiss said that was true is that you do need to have a vision for what you're going to execute to bring people on board. And when it comes to what we're working toward, there is that vision. Multi-caucus and caucus-neutral LNC, transparent finances, public business list, having a bolder and more coordinated approach to direct action, grassroots activism, structural changes that are going to actually make the Libertarian Party more representative of its members, and also building out a sort of intellectual arm as well. So those are things that we are all working toward. What are some other ways that we can be drawing people in terms of articulating a vision?
Well, see, when I come across people who used to be members but got disillusioned and left because of what they saw going on, like, normally this is what I tell them. I'm like, look, I understand, because I understand being disillusioned and thinking that the party's probably done for, but I can assure you I've seen so much energy lately behind the efforts to retake the party. Like, I think you should, rather than quitting, come to Grand Rapids with us, help us retake this thing and make it libertarian again.
And that's the problem too, is if there is that loss of momentum because people sort of accept this as a palliative mechanism as good enough, then there is a certainty that there will be a retaking and it will not be ours. So to keep on that pressure is crucial, and to keep building is crucial. Again, we have always been about more than just unseating a chair or being against a caucus. That's never really been what we've been about. It's been about principles, and it just so happens that there was a chair who was defying those principles. It was all downstream of wanting to rebuild the Libertarian Party really stronger than it's ever been.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we saw as members kept bleeding out further and further is that the people that are kind of excited about a McCardle chairship, that they in reality probably have a different political home. That a lot of the people that have cheered her on are not, probably contributors to the party, and that in general, if we want to bring these people back, we could bring on kind of the same process we had before, where we reach out to these libertarians that were a big donor before. Like Mark had brought up in the chat, that there is a history of this. If we can get people that have been donors before to come back, what will it take to get those people to come back will be independent of each person. What do they think is enough for them to say, I'm supporting a change? I think there was a good sign from this meeting. In the coming weeks and months, we will find out, is the new chair someone who will reach across the aisle and tap activists that are outside of his faction to bring these people back in, right? And say, these are people that we want to have, helping us. There's plenty of motivated activists, if you can represent them and are willing to at the national level, and no longer be this GOP light. And yes, now we got an ear of somebody in the FBI. Like, that is not a selling point to libertarians. That is you're selling rotten goods. That's selling rotten goods to a libertarian.
That means you're not a threat to the status quo.
That is.
FBI
that is
an extremist. It means that you've been thoroughly neutered and neutralized as a threat. Okay, and they're
100%.
Yeah, this is what
100%.
People fall for this over and over. And you see this, like, they're like, "Oh my God, the news is talking about us, and they don't hate us." It's like, that's a bad sign. Okay, if they're writing hit pieces about you, it means you're probably on the right track. It's like shortly after the Mises Caucus takeover, there was that SPLC hit piece. Like that, actually, a lot of us saw that and we're like, hey, I think we might be onto something. If Fed associated organizations are writing hit pieces about us, I think they actually might be worried that we might make this party libertarian and start an actually anti-state, anti-central banking movement. Yeah, that all disappeared though after a year or two, when the chair of the party was flattered into thinking that she was important by one of the two major party candidates, and happily sold the party out and neutralized it as a threat to the duopoly and to the status quo and the system as a whole.
To steelman this, and I don't entirely disagree with the point that I'm about to make. It sort of depends on how it's finessed. You could easily get someone saying, well, look, the Libertarian Party needs to be fighting this battle on multiple fronts. So there needs to be that radical activism. But there also needs to be a sort of lobbying arm or some way of talking with people who are in office, having their ear. I would argue the way that it was executed was extraordinarily poor and involved sort of a complete willingness to change the face of the Libertarian Party, and not for the better, just to be able to have the word libertarian slapped on something that was entirely antithetical to it. But to the end that there does need to be a practical political influence, how do we walk that line without, saying that we have the phone number of FBI agents?
Well, I think it points to kind of this really bad strategy that's been done by the leadership of the Mises Caucus as they've been in control of the LNC, is this idea that these personal connections are what's going to maintain the party, that somehow a connection to Trump is going to make libertarian policy actually come to real life. And I will congratulate the fact that Ross had been freed. I will also congratulate all the libertarians on the ground that aren't saying I did it when other people got done during the Biden campaign. And so this is the thing where you can kind of tell immediately if somebody cares about themselves or the movement based on what connections they build. Is it for the movement and is it representing the movement, or is it for themselves for some personal gain? And so I'm going to bring up a clip now of, Michael Heiss talking about why he is uniquely situated to be chair of the LP.
Chief, especially given the fact that, Steve had said he didn't have the connections. Well, I do. I have the support of the biggest voices in the libertarian movement who have been huge drivers of recruitment. I'm friends with Dave Smith. I'm maintaining a friendship with Angela, who has carved out a network into the halls of power that include RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, and Kash Patel. And we should be looking to expand into those networks, increase our power and influence so that we can use it for liberty. And I think I have those in ways that others don't.
So this is another one of those moments where it's I have this, and even then, like, to be boasting that, you know, I am friends with a guy who runs a podcast who occasionally is libertarian relating to war, but is pretty not libertarian when discussing putting militaries on our borders, right? And is, you know, not so great in response to some of these things, right? Like, he can be I've heard him be an incredible voice for the peace movement within our party. But sometimes I question his intentions when it relates to representing the broader movement. And so if your main goal is to represent only your version of libertarian, then yes, a connection to Dave Smith will be really great for your people. But we've seen what a kind of Mises Caucus only social club in the LNC has done to it, right? It has resulted in less donations, less members, and less principled messaging. Right. And I think this is something that people got a bait and switch on. And then the true kind of nature came out. And I think, as I've said earlier, that bringing in somebody whose only plan is to say, follow my orders, I will bring people that represent me only, and screw everybody else who may have devoted their whole life to this word libertarian. I think that is a horrible strategy as a chair. And I think the egocentric nature of his statements are a horrible kind of pitch to tell people to, be happy that he would be the chair. And I hope that people would recognize that there are other people that devoted their lives to this. And you don't own the word, man. It's not your vision only. And if you're not willing to represent other visions, you shouldn't be the chair. And I think, you know, whatever somebody might think of, like a former Mises Caucus member working with a non-Mises Caucus member for a new chair and vice chair position, it at least gives me hope based on what Stephen had said in his version of his pitches and when he was asked questions during that kind of debate period.
And I'm going to break my own rule here, but to your point about talking about your own connections, I think I remember writing at the time as a comment, good rule for political discourse is to refrain to the greatest extent possible from uses of the first person singular. There was a lot of I and me. There was certainly a lot of I and me in the previous chair's commentary. And we heard that again from Mr. Heiss last night. But you bring up a good point as well, Phil, that so we do have people who are maybe a little bit more edgelordy and will post crazy things and say crazy things. They are still, I mean, some of them at least are still libertarians. They're still members of the party. So how does that get navigated? How does that disconnected messaging get navigated? Because we're not going to police somebody's speech. We're not going to say, just because you said X, Y, Z, you know, you're not allowed to do that anymore. How do we push back?
I think each state probably will have to be, be making their determinations of, is this the kind of messaging that extends liberty, right? That it actually does. And I would hope that if there was coalition style chairships and boardships in various states, that a new kind of paradigm will be done where we can still have edgy, hardcore messaging about liberty, but remove some of the toxic stuff that I think represents libertarianism horribly. And I think you can make enough hardcore statements just using libertarian principles. Like, you don't have to add on any external level of that to really be effective, I think. And I would hope that becomes kind of a new standard among state positions. But you're right. Yeah, we really do believe in a decentralized network and a less powerful, less centralized LNC. At least in the LP Alliance, we're trying to figure out ways to make that happen. And so that would mean that states obviously would be free to make their own decisions. But I would hope that, like, this collaborative process, we can really show that the fruits of this collaboration really are more people elected, more donors coming in, more members waking up to it, because we're in a unique opportunity right now where we have a president that's acting unilaterally, that he's kind of existing on a false mandate that he thinks like 90% of the population agree with him. And he is doing things that are detrimental to people's rights. People, there are libertarians that don't like the Constitution, but we have them, and it has kind of muzzled the government from going beyond certain things, at least the appearance of not going beyond them. And now a lot of those are being like, well, screw that. And people that just happen to look like they might be migrants are being stopped, and their rights are now being violated, and they're opening up Gitmo. And so there's all these unique opportunities as libertarians that you can have hardcore principled messaging, like saying the migrants shouldn't go there, right? Like it should be the Raytheon, the people that go there, right? Like we could make ridiculous statements that are like really saying this is what we believe in. We don't want our money going to bombs that kill children across the planet. And we can do that in a way that is not edgelordy. And I hope that we can seize this unique opportunity, as Democrats are finally seeing, that it's not just who's in charge of the government, it's the amount of power that they can have while there. And these are conversations that I have been having every day with friends of mine. And I think there's a lot of people waking up to the fact that, man, we've given federal government way too much power. Yeah.
You bring up a good insight. Go for it.
Oh, yeah. Like what could possibly be more edgy than being opposed to this existence of the state? Like that's something that your average political normie is going to see and go, oh, that's crazy. So like if you can get that, like if you can grab their attention and then start explaining things like, we should just completely deregulate healthcare, because most people think that healthcare, like the whole reason that it's so expensive and that they can't afford it and people are dying from lack of care is because it's not regulated enough. So say just get the government out of healthcare. Okay, that's edgy enough. Some people will just dismiss you as crazy, but other people, like, it might pull them in, and then you can start explaining to them why healthcare is so unaffordable and why we need to get the state out of it completely and have free markets. So there's plenty you can do with actual libertarian ideas. You can present them in an attention-grabbing manner. Like you're cheating if you try to resort to racial slurs or whatever to grab attention. Like that's so low effort and stupid. And over time, it creates a culture where it signals to a certain types of people that they have a home in your movement, while other actually principled people are turned off and don't join you, that it causes a shift over time that you don't want.
Yeah, and it's collectivist too. But Phil, you had a good insight, which I think Rose is also picking up on, that so libertarianism is radical, anarchism is certainly radical and edgy, and it seems like some of the edgelording, right, sacrifices the edginess of libertarianism to just be edgy rhetorically. Right. So I'm going to say edgy rhetorical things, but I'm going to make it culturally okay by making it align, or at least culturally for a certain segment of the culture, by making it align with these very, very alt-right ideas. So there's a compromise in ideas in order to be bold on rhetoric. And we don't need to be doing that. As for radicalism and the virtues of radicalism in political discourse, if our ideas really are so edgy, this is the wonderful thing about being a minor party, being in a minor party, is that major parties have to make compromises on policy a lot. And so they will also fluctuate on their principles and on the interest groups that comprise those parties, that give to those parties. So they are not anchored in the same way that a minor party is to principle. Because of that, we actually have an obligation to be radical. We have an obligation to be dedicated to certain principles, to be that anchor, to be that political societal anchor, and hold some part of that Overton window in a certain location, right? And have it, and it's going to be pretty far out, just so that there isn't a forgetting of principles. That's the virtue of radicalism, is that there's always a reminder of what that principle is. It's a mechanism of ideological reproduction.
Yeah, and I think it also points to the idea that we can shift the window instead of shifting our personal principles. And that seems like what it's been consistently, and especially during 2024. And I think that's what turned off a lot of former Mises Caucus members or current Mises Caucus members that still hold on to the moniker, is this idea that they all came in with wanting hardcore principles. And a lot of them were just right-leaning libertarians, not necessarily these alt-right types that really don't believe in kind of a libertarian future that's kind of a mutual agreement and working together. They're much more of the idea of this Hoppian style covenant cities where they're going to define some collectivist trait that allows you in. And I think that's the worst representation. And if that becomes your sole form of messaging, even just to stir up attention, in reality, you're going to be out recruiting people of good moral character for people of low moral character. And I think it overall spells like a bad view. But again, this is something that each state is going to have to decide. I hope, we are obviously talking about one specific affiliate. I would hope that people would come in there and recognize that when we are trying to convert people away from this statism, that we are essentially talking to people that are brainwashed into thinking that they need a state to take care of them, and that they don't even recognize the abuses, right? That some of them, they think it's not an abuse, it's actually a feature. And that is a hard thing to break somebody to. And then if you're then using these collectivist terms against certain groups that have no real basis in reality as a way of stirring up attention, I think it does a disservice not only to that state affiliate, but the national movement. But again, it has to come from the ground up. And I would hope that as things are going now, there will be a lot of people to recruit in the coming years, that we can shift that culture to a healthier place that doesn't want that kind of messaging anywhere near them. And we can only hope for that, really. But maybe we should get back to the discussion on hand of this LNC meeting. There are people that are saying, this is obviously a kind of a compromise ticket. And there was a statement that came from Stephen during the kind of question and answer portion that left some of us at a bit of a pause. And maybe we could bring that up, Devin.
Something we've been on a downward trajectory for the past several years. Same thing with membership. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. And, I do have plans for both. Fundraising, number one, is we need money. I do plan on seriously considering selling the headquarters and using that money to get a full-time professional fundraiser, someone who's been in the industry for a long time, and I have a couple leads on that. We need outside help. We need professional help with our fundraising, absolutely. We need to make sure staff has their data cleaned up and that we're using that data on directed campaigns, on using it for social media, using it in ways to get in people's face, go through the data to try to pick people up, put them into certain categories for single issue coalitions, for renewals, for all that stuff. And I know the data has been an issue for quite a long time now, and I certainly would love to give some of our staff more hours, give them support, but it requires money. And that needs to be our number one priority. Once we get enough money in and we're fundraising, I'd love to continue voter gravity. I'd love to give candidates more tools. I'd love to hire maybe a political point person on staff, a political director, if you want to call it that, to help us strategize. But primarily to work on the lower levels, it's about resources, about getting the state affiliates the resources they need. And I am a past candidate. I did run for Key West District 4. I'm very involved in my local city. I volunteer. I do different things all over. I go to board meetings. So I'm definitely interested in running for office again. And I know what it's like to be on the ground. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. And yeah, please be in contact with our committee. We would love to help you with your efforts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. Ms. Yanuskevich.
Yes, Mr. Nikela, and I will be asking this of both candidates. For you as a standing member, a current member of the LNC, are there any conflicts of interest that you have not declared on our potential conflict list?
No, I can't think of anything. I did play with the idea of turning headquarters into a Wendy's. I think it's in a really good spot, but nowhere to put the drive-through, so no conflicts of interest on my end.
Thank you. Do we get, if that happened, do we get free Frosties?
We will, and our frosting machine is never broken.
Ugh.
Thank you, Ms. Yanuskevich. Mr. Vincent.
Yeah, Stephen. I would just like to ask if you would remain committed to Project Decentralized Revolution and all the staff that are working to effectuate that.
The answer is yes. Yeah, I do plan on keeping Mr. Heiss's contract going, and with the blessings of the board and input from the board, I want to see him continue to act out his vision as the architect for Project Decentralized Revolution. So the answer is yes.
So this is kind of a two-part discussion. One, which, when we live streamed this onto YouTube, we got comment about selling the HQ to fund other processes. And if somebody have talked, then rightfully so, that this is somewhat legally dubious. These were donated funds that are sequestered for the purpose of having a building. And so if it was sold, that money, I think, would be legally tied up to get another building. So it does point to some misunderstanding of what that building was purchased for. But I think the more salacious piece that kind of came here is not that he wants to support PDR. In general, I think having a PDR movement, whether you call it whatever version it's been called throughout history, this kind of local strategy that's been employed by numerous people, regardless what name you put on it, anybody doing this should be applauded. But people historically weren't paid to do this. And in the past, it had been much, much more effective. And you can look at LPPA and the amount of people that were done before getting elections, that were, getting elected libertarians. And that number has gone down as his paycheck has gone up. And so this is where I get worried that, he's trying to quell people that he probably shouldn't be, and just saying we're going to give it. My only hope, I guess, is that one of the statement he made was that if the board agrees, and I would hope that they would choose not to, at least in the short term, until a full investigation is completed. And it really shows that he was not involved in the communications or any of the sort of dealings that went on with the JFC, and that also went on with the Freedom Calls situation. But we'll have to wait and see what happens. What are your guys' opinion on this kind of statement of supporting Heiss still financially?
Well, okay, so wait, what do you mean, with his the people who are going to be funding him? Because well, one, I think it's already been pointed out that a politician does not announce the fact that they're bought and paid for. But two, it's a problem that he didn't want to disclose who is paying for him. I strongly suspect that there are people who come from, or at least are closely aligned with a different party, plus probably, we already know that he's associated with the American Values PAC, so he's already very close to RFK money, which RFK basically bought out the Libertarian Party. So,
well, no, I meant more so of he kind of said that they would continue his current contract. I don't know if you know this, but he gets paid currently to operate the Project Decentralized Revolution as a staffer for the LNC. And when asked directly, is this something you would continue under your chairship? He had said yes. So that's the question that I've asked.
Has it been a success? Do we know of anyone who was elected via Project Decentralized Revolution? Because like you pointed out, the number of libertarians in local office has actually dropped considerably since the Reno reset. And also, another thing that didn't occur to me until much later, but the Project Decentralized Revolution, where they have their little training courses where you can learn to run as a libertarian, and in theory, they'll support you directly. That actually allows them to do an end run around the state affiliates. Because generally, if you were going to run as a libertarian for local office, you'd have to be a member of your state affiliate party. So there was a vetting process. Through Project Decentralized Revolution, you can basically just come out of nowhere, decide to run as a libertarian, and they'll fund and support you. So in theory, they could support anyone who wanted to run as a libertarian, even if they're completely at odds with their state party.
Yeah, and so this is the interesting thing, right? Project Decentralized Revolution, that I think the thing that we all like is the notion of getting candidates elected at the local level. The way that I think it has been executed or attempted to be executed under Heiss is, well, what's decentralized is the micromanagement, right? So from national on high, there is the choice of who various candidates are going to be, and Rose is absolutely right. It's a way to do a runaround of the actual decentralized leadership within the party. So it also just needs to be much bolder. So there's a lack of trust in I think the between national and the state affiliates in many cases. And then why stop necessarily at candidates for office? You have certain causes that are particularly germane in one state or another, and that should also be supported. That should be a part of Project Decentralized Revolution. It's not just the candidate, it's also the cause. So if anything, yes, it's great, and we need to be going bolder with it.
But I also think if you have somebody who can devote their time to this without necessarily a paycheck, especially to proof of concept that, like, yes, we are really making an impact. Now, if he could show metrics that, like, man, we've brought in more members from this, we've got more donors from this, we've destroyed certain local regulations that have been screwing people over, that these things would say, you know what, maybe a paycheck would be deserved, right? And I think if that's going to continue, we need the LNC to set very clear standards, meet this metric or payment cut, right? And I don't necessarily like to see it just because, like you said, I feel like there's a lack of trust there currently, especially after he acted how he acted, trying to rally up this kind of coercive abuse about it. So I think maybe we should talk a little bit more about Heiss and his money situation. The idea that he, what he would do, would he remain a staffer if he was on the LNC as a chair? And I think we have a clip of that where he starts to talk about kind of the role of money as him being chair. Okay, here we go.
Razors for, I think. So the more of those issue coalitions, the more you can do that. We did try to do that with Matt Butts, but he didn't last long.
Right. So how close are we to making those calls and getting some money back from those efforts?
Well, the next thing, like I said, is standing up the psychedelic teams and the sound money teams. I am doing this part-time, so it's hard at 20 a week, 20, when you're doing the job of standing up the electoral strategy and the legislative strategy and the data strategy and all of this, it's pretty hard to do, part-time. So I would say within a couple of months, but I have also started the process of developing support materials, or marketing materials for those targets.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is kind of the idea that there might be some fruits of these efforts. And he kind of goes off on like that I'm doing all of this and I am doing this portion of it. So that's the reason why it hasn't been done. But it points to someone that can't delegate tasks, right? He is equipped in with this giant network of people that are supposedly trusted members around him. Sorry to spoil it for him, but like a lot of those people around him don't like him anymore, right? And so even then the ones that actually do like him, he can't distinguish that, delegate tasks to people that can get them done. That does not give me much faith that he'll be able to do this in a collaborative way with people that are vastly different than him, or delegate it to other people within the LNC or staffers.
It speaks to his ideology. I think you're absolutely right. That the failure to delegate speaks to a distrust and a sense of, well, I know how to do things. I am the Hoppian Tsar of the covenant kingdom, and I am the one who is able to dictate. I can't let anyone else do this because people naturally organize themselves into hierarchies, and so they must appoint me. So it's a little bit, I don't know if I already said this on a previous stream, but it is odd that the notion that Hoppe proposes is that people naturally organize into hierarchies, and yet Heiss and his faction were needing to coerce and force people to support him, which would suggest either A, people do not, after all, naturally organize themselves into hierarchies, or B, that they don't want him at the helm of those hierarchies. So yes, it is interesting. And anyone who does not know how to delegate tasks properly this suggests something about their overconfidence, almost an erotic overconfidence in their own insular ability to delegate, or rather to execute tasks. Mark pointed out as well that Project Decentralized Revolution is not really Heiss's creation. He says that the Libertarian Party has a long history of successfully targeting local boards, yes, commissions appointed and elected. So Heiss is selling an idea that wasn't his, and the Heissian amendments to that idea seem to be more detrimental than advantageous, and again, not bold enough.
Well, now they're charging money for it. Like there was recently an email that went around where you could sign up for classes or whatever, some kind of web course on how to run for a local office, where they used to offer free workshops on this at conventions. Yeah, basically they've just monetized ideas that have already existed, which seems to kind of be how they've gone about most of this whole takeover.
And I honestly, I don't mind monetization of things, but I think you get paid when you do a good job.
Yeah.
Right. And even then, the better one is to have people that are so motivated that they're going to devote their time to building something out. And in PA, there used to be a suite of documents that would be given to people to get them to elect. I still probably have access to that if I tap the right people. But there was a huge amount of institutional knowledge of how do you get people to run and elect local candidates, and what paperwork needs to get done, and how to be a good representative, and et cetera. And that was something that was provided free, right? It was yes, we have time for you. Yes, we can help you. And it is disheartening to see kind of this long-standing kind of process within the party being taken over, being done poorly, poor delegation, and people that are really maybe not motivated by actually getting libertarians elected, but instead maintaining influence and possible financial benefit from it. It's definitely an interesting time for local elections of libertarians in the country.
Yeah. Going to, and I know that we've been bouncing around a little bit, one thing that I think it is important is talking about these next steps iteratively, right? So in the immediate term, the important thing is getting people to state conventions and making sure that places where those bylaws are threatened, where there could be some stuff pulled in the future, to have enough individuals there at convention to block any hostile changes to the bylaws. And that's something that's going to require, again, all hands on deck, calling, making sure that people have transport. In the interim, getting to Grand Rapids. I know that one thing that we are doing as an alliance is making sure, or figuring out ways, platforms to set up so that people who need a ride, who need a hotel room, who need a place to stay, are going to have that, so that they don't need to worry about transportation or lodging when they get to convention. And it's a really, really important thing. One of the most critical aspects, I think, of this organization is that mutual aid approach that we've got, where people do come together and are able to offer those resources. So moving forward, when it comes to actually getting some revolutionary change in, that is going to require a lot of infrastructure. So hopefully we're going to be able to build that out as well.
Absolutely. I think it is key that we do that. And I think it's key that even in the short term, I think there's enough of a sentiment moving around now that if people that are having this inclusive view of the party moving forward, that don't want the divide anymore, that want to restore it to strong libertarian principles, that they will vote alongside the right side of history on a lot of these bylaws that could be offensive.
Well,
and
I think
it
we
does.
know. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh no, sorry. I thought you were done.
No, I was going to just ramble, so that's fine.
I was going to say, with the bylaws, I think at this point we know what kinds of changes need to be made to bylaws. We know what kind of loopholes need to be closed. Like, for example, it was honestly amazing how many state parties still had a loophole in their bylaws because they didn't specify that you had to reside in that state. Technically, it was legal for out-of-state people to join the party and then show up to their convention and vote. I think we know. I mentioned this a long time ago. Okay, we're a year and a half out from Grand Rapids. Now would be the time to get involved in your state's bylaws committee and propose any needed changes before we get to the national convention stage, or even before. Yeah, usually the convention before, or the state convention leading up to a national convention during a presidential election year is usually going to be busier than one in a non-presidential election year. So.
And we can tell you too.
Now would be the time to get bylaws changes passed if you have loopholes in your bylaws or changes that need to be made to prevent future hostile takeovers.
If you don't know whether you have loopholes in your bylaws, we are also the place to be. We have a lot of bylaw dorks on our team who are happy to tell you about the loopholes and the ways to close them.
And hopefully if we can get these closed, we can stop having these fights over it, right? That is, if people weren't trying to weaponize the bylaws in general, we wouldn't have this problem, right? I think we do need to move past a place where we are having these fights. I think in the short term, we do have to shore up some of these problems. But hopefully at some point we will become a kind of collaborative enough project that we aren't going to be having these fights over RONR anymore. I think it's usually a waste of time. Whereas if we can all just come together and agree, hey, I'm willing to work with you on these things. Let's not represent things this way. Let's work together on these things. This is a shared principle. Let's accelerate and raise up the things we all agree in. Let's kind of minimize some of the things that we disagree in, and be supportive of one another in the movement at whole. And I think a lot of these fights from bad actors kind of goes away. And I hope that's the case. But we also need people in there that respect the bylaws, right? And so I'm going to bring up a clip now of during kind of Heiss's question and answer portion where bylaws kind of got brought up and his interaction for presidency.
A multi part. I have to just tell you personally, which will be no surprise to you, that I believe that a staff member endorsing Trump was already a huge problem, and defending that as a chair candidate, I believe, is unconscionable. I'm wondering if you're aware that the bylaws actually do require the LNC to be partisan, and basically what you were advocating was against the bylaws. So I would like your opinion on that. Job of a presiding officer is to respect the rules of the party. The second thing I'd like you to address, that's been touched on by I think multiple people, is when the LP is your job and it's not coming directly from the LP. For instance, if we were blessed enough to be able to pay LNC members, but from outside donors, losing those donors, it's a temptation that we've seen already. I think some bad fruit that's from public records. And I note that you refuse to answer that question before. Do you believe it's the job, and this kind of circles back to the bylaws, of the chair to support the national candidate, even if you don't like them? And one correction, I actually spoke with Mr. Amash, and I do not believe you properly characterized his beliefs. I'm not saying it was intentional, but he certainly does believe in running local candidates and focusing on local races.
Yeah, I also have had conversations with him, and what I was told is that nobody cares about local. And I mean, granted, this was a few years ago, but I do think it's a significant difference. But I'm sorry, there was like 2 or 3 questions. Can you?
Yeah, sure. So
Would
primary-
I follow the rules of supporting the candidate? Yeah, I mean, I wasn't on the board. If I was on the board, of course, I would have to follow the rules, and I think the chair and the board did.
Oh, you think the chair properly supported Chase Oliver under the bylaws? Is that your opinion?
Yes, I think that is.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Well, that's disqualifying. Thank you.
Say what you will about Karen Ann. In that
was
moment,
one of the best moments ever. Like, yeah.
yeah, I think anybody who saw what happened to Chase Oliver, the kind of constant smear campaign that happened, whether you like him or not, from national and then from media organizations that were associated kind of with Heiss in dissident media, this kind of promotion of Trump while he's a paid staffer through one of his other businesses provides a pretty crazy conflict of interest, I think, in my opinion. And that I think he would have, if he's basically saying, I would have done the same thing Angela did. And that should be unacceptable for people that like Chase, don't like Chase. Whatever. This is somebody that's supposed to represent the party to the fullest, and that should be willing to represent all forms of libertarian, most definitely our presidential candidate, at least publicly. Now, if somebody votes personally that they think there's a lesser of two evils, I know that can be enticing. The idea of a lesser of two evil. It's something that we face every year when it comes to trying to entice voters to vote for our candidates. I understand that as an individual. I think as a representative, you have to maintain a certain level of attitude publicly. And I think the prior chair did this horribly. And I believe that there is strong financial incentives for her not to, based on her ties of these other nonprofits and JFC agreements that happened. And so I think he would have done the same thing. And I think that the board on the LNC that made sure he was not the new chair recognized that. And I think Karen Ann stood up very courageously against kind of his actions there.
Right. No, she had done that from the beginning. Because, I mean, Chase Oliver was not my first or second or probably third choice of candidate. Nothing against him. He just wasn't in my top three choices. But look, ultimately, okay, Mises Caucus had their candidate. They did not win. Chase Oliver was elected fair and square. So those of us who joined the party and then chose to be delegates representing our state affiliate, like we agreed we were going to support the will of the delegates. If we can't do that, then we should not be associated with this party. Okay, we can go join any other party. So I was very bothered by the fact that people, they chose to get involved, and then they just decided, you know what? Yeah, we made this agreement, but we don't like the outcome, so we're just going to ignore the will of the delegates. Like, that's a serious problem. Okay, that should not happen. Okay, you either you joined a voluntary association, you agreed to the rules up front. You don't just get to say you're not going to obey those rules because you don't like something that happened. You can't join a voluntary organization and then just decide you're not going to obey the rules you agreed to. So, yeah, that even for people like me who were part of the Mises Caucus and for whom like the duly elected nominee was not our first choice, that really bothered a lot of us. I don't think, and again, another situation where I don't think the leadership realized just how many people they alienated with those actions of just deciding that they were going to throw the duly elected nominee under the bus and that they were going to blatantly endorse another party's candidate.
Yeah, and moving forward, since Heiss did not, after all, he was not, after all, elected. One thing that was discussed, it was the formation of that investigatory committee. Now, this is something that was kind of controversial. They kept on adding members to that committee. Ultimately, what there should really be is that there needs to be an independent investigation. And there would be the money for it. We have tried to pool and see basically how much various members would be willing to donate to that. The money is there if we want that. So if anyone tries to say going forward that the money does not exist for an independent investigation, which needs to happen, that is incorrect. That's not true. And so we'll be keeping an eye out for that.
Yeah, and during that discussion, you know, some of that ideas that we initially brought up of this idea of the not only violation of bylaws that we just discussed about supporting our presidential candidate, but also a violation of the NAP. And Adrian talks about it here relating to Miss Hayes. Can we bring up that clip?
And that would be my my substitute amendment.
Before it's seconded, Mr. I have a point of order. I know Mrs. Hayes to do it, but thank you, Mr. Chair. So Ms. Hayes needs to be kept off this committee. She was going to say she was already threatened legally if she were on a committee of this kind, so she needs to be removed.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I will, without objection, then I will remove her name.
So this brings back to that idea that they, you know, these people that will constantly claim that lawfare is used against them for a very legitimate reason, for somebody forming an investigative committee, they are being now threatened with lawsuits. And you know, beyond that, further discussions happened with of other members about the kind of level of coercion that was happening behind the scenes. And so this points to this: will use any tactic necessary to maintain power. And this is very reminiscent of, you know, states in their dying eras. So all centralized powers, as they are losing their control, will use increasing levels of violation of the NAP, further coercion, further centralization of power, and further isolation of the people that they used to rely on to support their centralization. So seeing this was an obvious expected end. And it's sad because I think a lot of these people, if they would have known the level of things that happened prior, maybe it wouldn't have taken this long for them to fully wake up to this behavior. And it sucks that we have somebody that is willing and wanting to investigate this, that is being coerced off of doing so.
It's always so easily rationalized too, because they always can point to some example where, like, the previous leadership supposedly did that to them. Like, I remember all these discussions following, I think, like, when the LP of Colorado tried to pull that stunt where they wanted to run RFK on their ballot, and then also when the joint fundraising committee was announced, like, people were making all sorts of rationalizations in the Mises Caucus, like, oh, well, this is the fault of the people who voted yes on seating delegates that we thought shouldn't have been seated, or like they did it first, so therefore we can pull blatantly corrupt actions because they did it too. There's always a rationalization.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it speaks to that need for that independent committee. And I think the line that we're going to get is, why can't we just move on if McArdle is not chair anymore? The answer is that we don't know who else would be implicated, and it's important to have faith in the LNC. And if people are being compromised on this committee, I doubt it's just Hayes. I doubt it's just Meredith Hayes. If people would be threatened and they're working on this committee and trying to do some fact finding, that's concerning. That says this is not going to be an impartial investigation, even if you want it to be. So one thing to push and push and push hard on is getting that independent investigation, restoring trust and faith in the LNC, and restoring the integrity of the party.
Right. It sounds like there's going to be a fundraiser for that soon. Like, there's already talk of, it looks like there's going to be donations or donors for it, and there probably will be an official fundraiser at some point. So hopefully we can get the ball rolling on that, because there needs to be an outside impartial investigation that can't be compromised, either because somebody is being threatened or blackmailed, or because somebody has vested interest in covering something up.
Well, and that's the thing to do as well, is if we know where the money could come from, to be able to get that money and say, we will donate this, we will give this if it will be used for this independent investigation, would go a long way.
Yeah, I think an earmarked account that says this is a donation link specifically for this. And I think people are thinking, oh, well, people aren't going to donate money to the party if they donate money to this. My argument is that I will donate more. if you do this.
It will
And-
increase trust and then ultimately increase donations to the party. I think if people know that the money that they're donating isn't going to go into the bank account of somebody's domestic partner, for example, just as a hypothetical.
I
Freedom is
agree.
calling. Freedom is calling.
I agree entirely. And I also think that just in general, it puts forth a new future for the party where we get back to real transparency. And so that is one of the goals of LP Alliance, is to, because it would be a cross-faction coalition, there would be people holding each other accountable. The goal and agreement that goes in beforehand among these people that might represent different versions of libertarian is that they want transparency, they want principled libertarianism, and they want all of these ideas represented, and nobody's ideas kind of being, put to the wind in favor of one versus another. And I think regardless of where you are, trust and transparency in the party is something we should demand just based on libertarian principles of free associations. That if you're going to take our money and utilize it for our shared principles, that it really needs to be clear that this sort of thing will never happen again. And to do that, we need to be sure that every single person involved at the LNC level is cleared, or what level of involvement they were, where did they turn a blind eye. And if that happens to catch other people involved, I think that it is required to do so. And if there is a fund that happens for this, I will donate to that. And I will also donate to the party. I've already planned to give money to National now, just because I want to give a good faith effort that things can be different, that a coalition can form across the aisle. But I will say I will give more and to both options if they're there. And I know I'm not alone. I know there are people that have left the party that they will begin donating again if they know that this is an initiative that the new chair and the new vice chair and the board supports. So I really hope to see that moving forward.
Yeah, that and a complete public accounting of finances, financial transparency. And if we can get that business list back and have that be public, if that's not happening, again, these are red flags. These are causes for concern and may even be too little too late. I don't know. But yeah, those are some major things that need to happen as quickly as possible.
I agree. Okay, so let's get our final thoughts overall on the last LNC meeting, and hopes, dreams, disappointments. Just final thoughts overall on the state. I'll go to Rose first.
Right. So, like I said previously, I think this was the best outcome we could have hoped for under these circumstances. But obviously, the fight is nowhere near over. Okay. There are a number of changes that I think need to be made to ensure that something like this is never able to happen again. I personally think that we need bylaws changes that make the LNC more accountable to the membership. For example, we need to be able to recall, and I think the delegation needs to be able to recall an LNC member. The current system of having LNC officers able to remove each other is a problem because it allows them to remove someone who's a minority voice. And the people who voted for that officer don't get a say in the matter. Like, I think if they could vote, that would change things. So I think maybe outside of a few very specific circumstances where someone needs to be removed immediately, I think the delegates who elected that person should be able to vote on whether or not they are able to be recalled. I know this is like, this would take some serious overhauls because there would need to be a system put in place to allow people to vote without calling a convention. But there clearly needs to be accountability because I feel like the party was never really designed with the idea that an entire LNC or a majority of an LNC could be corrupt. There are recall provisions, but they clearly were not sufficient in the event that multiple members were compromised. So yeah, changes are very clearly needed. There also needs to be transparency, like the public business list needs to be specifically required so that future LNCs can't decide to just hide it if they don't, well, if they don't want to, for example, they don't want to give the excuse that they don't want their personal drama on display for everyone. In actuality, I think they just didn't want people to see corruption, or they didn't want to have the level of infighting evident to the membership. But yeah, the fight is not over yet, and there are a ton of changes that still need to be made, which is why we still need to continue getting people on board. We need to show up in 2026 and make these needed changes.
I agree. I will say my final piece, and then I'll give it to Amanda to close as a beginning and an end of this this live stream. Yeah, the bookends of this live stream. I am hopeful. I have seen people that I would never expect kind of waking up to things that they were before, maybe drinking the Kool-Aid before, right? I have also seen people that are still asking, I want the red Kool-Aid versus the blue Kool-Aid. And so I think, the people that have woken up, I would ask you to do your best to wake up the other members of people that trust you, that know you as a friend, that know that you're principled and that you have respect, and go to them and say, no, there aren't some lolberts that are causing this, right? That it was a real event that happened, and a real change of the will of the membership, and that free decisions and a decentralized, information process led to people making these decisions. And that, and those decentralized decisions happen because of a centralized authority trying to tell them what to do, and against their reason and their logic. And that hopefully those friends can wake those people up, because what I've found out recently is that a lot of Mises Caucus members that I immediately might have painted with a brush of being, kind of on the bad side of history, weren't aware of a lot of things, and that in reality, they bought bad goods, right? They didn't know what they were getting involved in, and they didn't see necessarily the toxic, abusive culture or the exclusionary actions. And I think a lot of them now see the damage that it's done to the party, to basically say fuck you to everybody else that used to be, people that really wanted to see the party grow and be successful. And so knowing those things now, I think those people that have walked away are best equipped to wake up further of their friends. Ideas are viral, and when you have the truth on your side, you don't have to spin some narrative and some lie about these evil people that are just against the right libertarians and they hate Ron Paul. And you don't have to do that, right? You can just talk to me, right? You can talk to Amanda, you can talk to Rose, you could talk to plenty other libertarians, and find out the truth. And I hope that you will share that with your friends, and get them to realize that we could work together. We don't have to be along this divide. Let's work together to heal it, and then make the party better than it's ever been before, and really make a change. And I'll pass it on to Amanda now.
Yeah, no, that was perfectly said, both of you. And to give people, again, a timeline, battle strategy, whatever, and actually maybe to use a little bit of military imagery, right? So if you think about what happened last night, if you're on a battlefield, we have been pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed right to the edge. And then we got a little bit of ground back when McArdle left. Then there was an immediate surge to try and push us all the way back even further. And we withstood that. We didn't make ground. And so now we're going to try and make ground and get to where we need to be. So to that end, first thing is to push for that independent investigation and know that we can get the funds if they're earmarked for it. The second thing is to figure out when your state convention is, and we will do what we can to get you there. If your state convention has already passed, if your seasoning deadline has already passed, then work with us, and we'll have you help with other conventions so that there's still a role that's being played here. And all throughout, right, we're discussing bylaw changes. We're discussing various ways to move from principle to praxis and actually get into the political arena from a principled position. That takes dialogue, that takes talk. So have dialogue with us, come and debate ideas with us. And this way it can really be our movement for all of us. Finally, Grand Rapids. That's something where we're all going to need to be. We're all going to need to have our game faces on for that. And one thing, again, that we're working on is having this slate that we might endorse, but having a website that is impartial, where candidates can come and answer questions and present themselves to you so that you know that you're making that best choice. And we're working on building that website out right now. The current site that we do have is lpalliance.com, which is a little bit more partial, clearly, because it's got our name on it. But we're working on all of these things so that you can have that choice and that we can be making these choices, having these discussions together. And we are excited to have you on. Look, we're scrolling down, okay, from vision to victory. Yes. Thank you so much for being with us, and we'll see you again.
Thank you. It was a great to join you as usual.
Thank you.